Welcome to the Global Lane. I'm Gary Lane. Today on Where in the World, CBN News Europe reporter Dale Hurd will join us to talk about Sweden, their protection of ISIS fighters, and how Hungary is responding. Next, from the home front, Erik Rosales will join us to discuss North Korea, submarine missiles, and the warning for Guam. And Congressman Scott Taylor will also be here to talk improvements at the VA. And moving on to setting it straight, recording artist Joy Villa talks to us about America's division and how the nation can unite once again. And lastly, for driving it home, I'll look at the Confederate Monument controversy and why more Charlottesville riots may loom on the American horizon. And it all starts right now, right here on the Global Lane. Is Sweden the last place you thought would sympathize with ISIS fighters? You may want to think again. Around 150 ISIS fighters have been granted protected identities so they can find jobs after returning to Sweden. But the country refuses to protect one Christian woman who faces danger if deported back to her home in Iran. Here with this story now is our world reporter, Dale Hurd. Dale, so what's going on here?
When I'm in Sweden, I'm asking them, look, America's a big country. We have our share of stupidity, but Sweden's a really highly intelligent country. They've been doing a lot of stupid stuff lately in regards to immigration, treating men who are clearly in their 20s as minors who come into the country, the refugees coming, they want unaccompanied minor status. And then there's the case of this woman, the Christian woman, and there's the ISIS fighters. They feel sorry for them, so they're trying to help them get work.
They get all kinds of benefits as well, right?
Yeah. And I should update that story about the Idine Stranson story. Her attorney has appealed to the Migration Board. They're waiting for an answer. I mean, she's gone through the process and they've rejected her, so officially she's still awaiting deportation, but they're hoping for another appeal.
They really haven't addressed this whole jihadist movement very well, and it seems like this is spreading throughout Europe. What's going on elsewhere?
Well, as you know, Western Europe is full of self-hatred. It's coming to this country as well. Hatred of our history, our culture, even when your culture is imperfect, because let's just stick with Europe and stay out of the U.S. for now. I mean, colonialism, wars, but Christian civilization, as we know, has been such a bright spot in history, and yet they hate their history. A former Swedish Prime Minister, Reinfeldt, has said Swedish culture doesn't matter. And it's this view that Islam doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where these people are come from. We can just plug them into our economic machine and they'll do great. They're in a lot of trouble there because they essentially lied to people and said, all these doctors and engineers are coming from the Middle East. Well, guess what? It turns out most of them are unemployable. Many of them are illiterate, even in their own language from the Middle East.
Let alone learning Swedish.
Right, and Sweden is a high-tech economy. They have large numbers now of migrants who will never be able to find meaningful work there.
Dale, when I was there 2 years ago, some Swedes said to me, I said, well, aren't you concerned that all the Muslims coming in are going to change your culture? And they looked me in the eye, and I'm not kidding you. They were serious about this. They said, what Swedish culture? So how can you protect it when you don't even know what it is?
Right, and I don't want to go on a side trail, but I've asked, where does this cultural self-hatred come from? People say it's rooted in the Holocaust. I think it's rooted in Marxism and the whole idea that Marxism hates nations. It wants an international movement, and you see they're trying to knock down borders and just do away with nation states, essentially.
And right here in America as well. Now, data from Sweden's National Bureau for Statistics shows that 3,430 rapes were reported during the first 6 months of 2017 this year. 43% of them involve children, but only 23% of sexual crimes are reported. So who's committing these crimes, and is the Swedish government doing anything about it?
First part of your question, well, we know that migrants in Sweden are grossly overrepresented in the crime rate. Per capita, they're committing most of the crimes. If you say this too much, you're a racist. But those
or Islamophobe.
Right. Yeah, but those are the facts. Second part of the question, you may have heard that the Swedish police force is almost breaking down on the street level because officers have been jerked around by political correctness, and now they have this crime wave, and there's not enough of them. They're getting burnt out, and a lot of officers want to quit.
Tough times in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And you were recently in Hungary. And when you revealed that story about the Swedish Christian woman, she was threatened to be deported back to Iran. Hungary stepped in. Tell us what happened there.
Well, Hungary heard about our story, which other media outlets broadcast, including a Hungarian outlet, and they saw that, and they offered her asylum status if she passes their security check, which I'm sure she will. Hungary, you have a nation that is proudly Christian. It's the opposite of the rest of Western Europe. As you know, Hungary has an office to help persecuted Christians in the Middle East. They've spent millions of dollars helping Christians in the Middle East.
And Jews, too, I think.
And I think Hungary has been blessed. I mean, they've been blessed with a lot of common sense compared to Western Europe.
And when I was there a couple of years ago and 6,000 migrants were coming in every day, they put up a fence there and they were criticized for that. But it's a small country. People don't realize only about 5 million people, isn't it?
Right. Right. And the head of the Secretary of State, Kovac, told me that, you know, we've lived next to Islam for hundreds of years. We know about Islam. We know that Islam matters. It matters where people are from. That really is the core of the whole debate and the whole problem in Europe right now.
Okay, Dale, we appreciate your reporting, and people can see your stories at cbnnews.com, the Hungary story that you've just completed, also your Swedish ones on the Christian woman that was going to be deported. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Erik Rosales now joins us to talk about North Korea and their threat to attack Guam. Erik, it seems like the president's strategy is working.
Yes, it does appear to be working. You know, we are hearing that Kim Jong-un has decided to step back a little bit on his plans and not fire anything as of yet right now. But we as reporters actually got a visit from General Mattis last night over at the Pentagon. It was late last night at around 4:30 when we got the call. We all headed on over there, and he talked a little bit about how this could escalate into war and it become very, very ugly. Kind of echoed what the president was saying all this time. And we don't know if that actually did in fact scare Kim Jong-un, but it appears that he is backing down.
I know there were some satellite images that showed submarines being loaded with something in North Korea. What are the threats North Korean submarines may pose to Guam and the western U.S., possibly with missiles?
Well, you know, he does have a few submarines over there, Kim Jong-un, but I did talk to Pentagon officials, and they say that they are watching the waters very closely. They are continuously monitoring the coast there around North Korea and around South Korea. But as of right now, yes, that's what we had been hearing as well. Some analysts say that there was even a tarp over the entire situation and where the submarines are to load the missiles. But we do not know if, in fact, he has that capability. That's important to notice that, you know, this may just be more tests or it may just be more propaganda by Kim Jong-un. But as of right now, we are not hearing anything of him actually testing anything with the submarine. But earlier we did hear that, and it was kind of interesting in that respect.
Now, if they did fire a missile from North Korea to Guam, how long would it take for a missile to hit the island?
Oh, it's only like 14 minutes or so is what they're anticipating, and that would be though enough time for us to be able to employ our THAAD system to be able to. We have a full battery of a THAAD system, which includes six actual missiles, but they can be reloaded, and they would actually be able to shoot that missile down. And I did talk to Pentagon officials, and they say that they are very confident that they're 15 for 15 in tests, and that they would be able to get that missile and track it and be able to shoot it down with not a problem to the threat to Guam.
Finally, Erik, reports are saying the plan to hit Guam could reach Kim Jong-un's desk within a week. Erik, is the U.S. going to take action? This doesn't seem to give the U.S. a lot of time to act.
Oh, no, I don't think it does give the Pentagon too much time to act. But at the same time, we have to remember that the Pentagon has been planning for this for many, many years. I mean, and we've really only taken it very, very seriously since President Trump came into office. So that was one of his main priorities there. And the Pentagon says that they are ready. They are ready to act. As of right now, they are doing some strategic testing in the area. I'm talking about U.S. officials along with U.S. military, along with coalition forces with both Japan. We are doing some exercises out there in the Sea of Japan, but so we do have another 3,000 Marines that are going to be heading on out to the area for that testing. So now would not be a very good time for Kim Jong-un to do any sort of testing with his ballistic missiles.
Okay, Erik Rosales, thank you for joining us from Washington.
Thank you.
During the presidential campaign, Donald Trump vowed he'd take on the bureaucracy at the Veterans Administration. Now, he pledged to make it more efficient and responsive to veterans. But what kind of actions have actually been made? Have they made a difference since he took office? Congressman Scott Taylor, former Navy SEAL from Virginia's 2nd District, joins us to explain. Congressman Taylor, the VA has had their share of problems. Can you tell us about some improvements that have been made under this administration?
Sure. Well, I think you said it very correctly and succinctly that the VA has certainly had some problems, and everybody knows that. You have a Secretary Shulkin who has really wanting to tackle this head on, as well as a president, of course. So one of the first things that Congress has passed is the VA Accountability Act, which allows them to, the Secretary basically to fire folks. I mean, you had a director in Puerto Rico, I think, who was getting convicted of a crime, was taking prescription meds and something else as well too, but they couldn't. They tried to fire him, and then he appealed, and he was back on the job. They couldn't fire him, which is insane. So you have to have accountability for the folks that are running the show there, and quite frankly, a lot of them running it in a poor way. So that's the first and foremost thing. You also have more choice in veterans health care right now with this secretary. Congress has passed, the president has signed as well too, which enables vets to be able to seek a little bit more choice of private care when they can't get the care they need from the VA centers themselves. So that's certainly a huge improvement. I actually just passed, our office passed another VA accountability bill through the House, which is moving on to the Senate. And what that would do, and here in Hampton, we knew that there was the Hampton facility was performing at a 1-star level out of a 5-star rating. And all they did to correct that was take the director and swap them out with someone else. So no accountability at the highest level. So this would require the secretary to report to Congress that you have when they move senior executives, as well as personally sign off on a senior executive change like that. So you're seeing more accountability, you're seeing more choice, you're seeing that Secretary Shulkin is moving to update these old IT legacy systems. The VA has literally has legacy systems that have MS-DOS. So you remember floppy disks that were out there. So they're looking at commercial products that are off the shelf to make sure that it keeps up with technology, to make sure that it's talking to DoD, because what you've seen that 100% of the people in the VA are from DoD, and those systems didn't talk correctly. So they're changing that. So there's a lot of improvements coming to the VA under the leadership of this president and Secretary Shulkin and Congress, of course.
You also recently passed your first bill that will tighten requirements on Veterans Affairs Department administrators to report to Congress when senior executives are transferred within the VA system. So what sparked this bill?
Well, you have a huge bureaucratic layers in the VA. You have, I guess you could say, it's socialized medicine, where it's just state controlled. And as we know that, the private sector does things a little bit better. That being said, I think it's very important, incumbent upon leadership to make sure that we do our duty in taking care of our veterans medically. Once they're there, they've served us, of course. We have to do the same thing for them. So I'm for more privatization, but not complete privatization, because it's the government's duty. But you just have these bureaucratic layers, and it seems as though, as like I just talked about, the accountability now that we had to pass legislatively to remove underperforming, subperforming senior level folks at the VA. So you had these folks that were sort of protecting the bureaucracy as opposed to making sure that the healthcare was good, for the veterans. That's not to say, and I definitely want to say this, there are many, many people who work in the VA system who deeply care about taking care of veterans and are doing a great job. But it's pretty clear that there needed to be some structural changes.
At least 20 veterans are killing themselves each day in America. Must the VA share some responsibility for these shattered lives? And what can we do? Are we doing enough to help them before they take their own lives?
Well, I think that's a great question and of huge concern to a lot of folks. One of the problems that I see personally, and you have when you look at the 16 years now that we've been in conflict, never before has the United States been in this type of conflict for this long. And never before has a small percentage of the country, less than 1% of the country, been going back over and over again, sharing that burden on their shoulders, their family's shoulders. So you have this gap too as well when folks get out of active duty before when they're on active duty. They have, their teammates that are in the military. They have these organizations, these structures to be able to deal with problems. But then when they get out, there's like this gap. And of course, with the VA, we've seen problems with the suicide hotline. We've seen problems, and this is something that my office is working on, in that there's not a uniform policy for walk-ups. So let's say you come up to a VA and you're exhibiting suicidal signs, or you're saying I'm suicidal. Well, there's not a uniform policy across the whole nation, because it is decentralized in some respects, that says what's the procedures to deal with someone who comes up physically there. Now, there are also populations like, listen, I'm from the SEAL teams and special warfare. A lot of our folks, the problems that we've had with suicide, people don't reach out to the VA. They just don't. They don't call the suicide hotline. They're not walking up there. They're looking for potentially someone else who understands them, other veterans that are sort of emergency response to help them out and their families. And again, there's that gap when they leave the service, become veterans. So my office is working on a suicide prevention program, actually right here in Virginia Beach and the surrounding areas, to look at that gap, to say, okay, let's look at a public-private partnership that brings the VA in, that brings folks that are working on traumatic brain injury and PTSD and depression, and also a quick response force, if you will, that can go right to that veteran's house 24/7 to bring them in, to help them in, and to keep them close to their families as well too. So I think that we need to change the way that we look at suicide prevention with the VA, and we certainly need a uniform policy across the VA for people who actually physically walk there.
Joy Villa is not the typical Hollywood star. Despite being #1 on iTunes and Amazon following her 2017 Grammys appearance and beating out Beyonce, Adele, and Lady Gaga, she's a proud Trump supporter and a conservative. She didn't even try to hide her vote. She wore a Make America Great Again dress to the Grammys this past year. One of the more important things about Joy is her goal to unite the American people, even when tragedy strikes a country like we witnessed this past weekend in Charlottesville. Well, Joy joins us now to talk about all of this. Joy, thanks so much for being here. First, I just want to say one thing about the media outlets like CNN, who are putting the blame on Trump for the incidents in Charlottesville. What do you think? No matter what he says, does he still get blamed?
No matter what he does, he's going to get blamed. First when he made the initial message, he condemned bigotry. It was very obvious that he was saying that it's not okay. There's no place in America for bigotry. And yet they still said he didn't say enough. So then he named white supremacy as obviously being a hate group and being evil, and we don't condone that. And still they say too little, too late. So there's nothing that the president is going to do that is going to appease these people, because they're going to criticize him, they're going to hate him, and they want to tear down this country. Instead of promoting unity, they want to promote dissension, and they won't be happy until we're destroyed. So there's nothing he can do to please those people. What he needs to do is just speak directly to the American people, to his voters, to his supporters like us, and ignore the noise, including the press.
Now, Joy, I know at one time you felt the burn. You were a Bernie Sanders supporter. So what made you get behind the president?
Well, I've always been an outsider and not very political, but I was raised Republican. I was raised conservative, sort of fell into the Hollywood scheme of things and went away from conservatism a little bit, just sort of went away from politics. And I became very disillusioned during the Obama era. I said, I don't want any more, politics in the House. I don't want any more politicians running the country. And a couple friends mentioned Bernie to me, and he seemed like he was the outsider that we were looking for, who wanted to change the nation and not just be a politician, but be somebody who was an outsider. So I looked into him. I thought he was good. I started doing more digging, and I found out he's really a socialist. He does not back up the same things I back up as a conservative, as a Christian. He doesn't follow the same things. He's not pro-life. So of course I couldn't back somebody like that. And I quickly said, okay, that's not the man for the job, and became a prompt Trump supporter. And I am to this day, and I voted for him.
Well, how's it been for you now supporting President Trump in your career? I'm sure that's not a popular thing in Hollywood. How has it affected you?
Well, it's even worse now because there's a lot of celebrities who are using their platform to promote dissension instead of unity. You know, when certain celebrities tweet, when they say, oh, the president doesn't support you, he doesn't love you, he doesn't like you, he's this and that and the other, they're giving a lot of fear to the American people rather than saying, hey, let's join together, let's unify. They're using their platform for hate. And me as a celebrity, I've always wanted to use my platform for love, for understanding, to invoke a good dialogue amongst all different sides, because only through love, only through unity can we unite in God's country. So for me, I've gotten a lot of blowback being a Trump supporter because these people who do hate me, who hate the president, they don't understand what he's fighting for, what he's up against. And I understand that he's fighting for the cause to unite America, to make us great again, to make us truly self-sufficient for the rest of the world, to see us as a beacon of hope. And, you know, people are going to be disillusioned. They're going to see the bad news and they're going to believe the hype. And they've death threats to me. They've sent me death threats and insults. I just keep on going because what's the worst they can do? The best thing for me and for other people is to just do your own research and to stay hopeful and to remember that, you know, many times in history we've had dissension in the world, but we've always come back twice as strong, and we will prevail. I truly believe that.
The country is clearly very divided right now. So what do you recommend? How can we come together here in America?
It's a great question. One of the biggest things is, I believe, is to turn off your TV. When it gets too much, you know, sometimes the news can get into your heart and your spirit and make you feel like the end of the world is here and everyone's going down in flames. It's not true. Go outside, take a walk, have conversations with your fellow men and women, and make sure you promote unity and inclusiveness in your own society and stand up for what's right. And make sure that you know that the world is not ending. It's a beautiful time for us in America. And the more that we look with our own eyes, rather than watching the news, rather than being downtrodden, the better we will be. So keep your spirits high and know that it's not the end. This is just the beginning. And to just keep on create positive things in this world. All artists, all people in the media should be creating things that are positive. You know, families, spend your energy on your family, spend your energy on things that make you happy, because that, at the end of the day, is really what it's about. And what's going on in the news is not what's going on in our homes. And it doesn't have to go on in our hearts.
It's all about the heart, isn't it, Joy?
Absolutely.
And for those who are protesting over the weekend, what message would you want to send to them?
I would say really look at what message you're putting out there, because I think this mob mentality, people think that their voice doesn't matter, so they join with other people to protest, thinking that's going to help. But what it does is it creates more of a mob mentality, and it creates a big amount of noise. And instead of doing that, use that energy to create something positive.
Well, Joy, as a baby boomer, I'm so happy to see someone such as yourself, a younger person that actually does research and looks into the issues and doesn't just take whatever is handed to them. So we appreciate you, and we appreciate your career. Keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
And I know that we will have success in this country, and we can unify under God, because we are blessed and we are fortunate to be here.
And we'd love to talk to you again. So God bless you.
You too.
Sudden change is often hard for some people to accept, and tearing down Civil War monuments, it's a sore spot with many people, particularly right here in Virginia. I was born in the North, and I have ancestors who fought for the Union. But I also marched in a civil rights demonstration in the late 1960s. But I've lived in the South for more than 30 years now. I call it my home. It is my home. And I love the people here. I've come to understand their viewpoint. You see, General Lee is a Southern hero. Sure, he fought to preserve slavery, and that's bad. But the Civil War wasn't just about slavery. You talk to any student of American history, and they'll tell you it was also about preserving an agrarian way of life, as industrialization and urbanization started to creep into the southern states. It was also about states' rights, preserving the right of states to determine their own destiny without excessive federal control. Tear down General Lee, and you tear away at Southern history and heritage. Now, that said, when some people of color look at a statue of Robert E. Lee, all they see is someone who fought to preserve slavery. They're offended. So perhaps the solution is to put General Lee and other Confederate heroes on private, not public property, like those who oppose government-funded Confederate statues on public property. I'm offended when government money is sent to Planned Parenthood because I'm opposed to abortion and the abortions they perform there. I don't want my tax dollars going to murder unborn babies. I think they have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but that's for another commentary. So Christians, how can you share Christ with an unsaved African American if you're waving a Confederate flag in their face or sitting in a park beside a statue of Robert E. Lee and you know that may offend them? Should they be forced to send their tax dollars to the city to maintain that statue and that park? But folks, listen to this one. In the rush to dismantle offensive statues, let's not erase our history. Not all of our history is good. We need to take the good with the bad. Recently appearing on Fox and Friends, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said, "When you start wiping out your history, sanitizing your history to make you feel better, it's a bad thing. If our children and grandchildren only see statues of General Grant, by the way, he owned a slave, but freed him prior to the Civil War, won't the children wonder who fought against Grant? Shouldn't they also learn about General Lee and see statues of him? It's a slippery slope when we act only to preserve the history we like." Now listen to what President Trump told reporters.
George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture.
So are we going to tear down the Jefferson Memorial? Are we going to rename the Washington Monument because George Washington owned slaves? Rename Washington, D.C. and call it just the District of Columbia or the District? Like it or not, our leaders and all of us are flawed beings. President Bill Clinton had sex with an intern. He lied about it and was impeached. Should we also force him to close the doors of his presidential library and museum? Nah. So where does all this cleansing of history end? Isn't that what ISIS tried to do in Iraq and Syria? It's not what democratic republics do. Remember, those who refuse to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. So let's compromise, find a solution that works for everyone. Otherwise, there may be more Charlottesvilles in our future. Now, we're told in Psalm 133:1 how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. So let's pray for unity and godly solutions. Let's not allow racism and the murderous and violent acts of white nationalists and left-wing extremists tear us apart and divide us. No matter our race, creed, religion, or political affiliation, let's love one another and work to be united as one America. Well, that's it for the Global Lane this week. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.